Hello guys, welcome to my third YouTube video. If you haven't seen the other two, I highly suggest that you go over there and watch them because they are in an introductory class to this one. So let's get started. In this example, we can see a string that is really long. As you can see here, you have to scroll right to see everything. Now let's go ahead and print this string. And when you run it, you can see that the computer can execute it without a problem. However, when a human is reading it, you can clearly see that he has to go right and left, and whenever you go right, you won't be able to see the code. So in this situation, it's better to do a multi-line quote. To do this, you open with 3 quotation marks and you close with 3 quotation marks, and then you can just go ahead and click enter, and you'll see that it is all in green now. If we go ahead and print this, you can see that it will print out in 2 lines. So now that we have seen multiple line quotation, let's go ahead and learn how to access information inside of strings. So the first thing you'll need to know is that to access information in strings, you'll have to open a bracket and close a bracket. Whenever you are trying to access information, you'll have to do this. So the ended system in Python starts in 0 and goes moving up one by one. So as you can see here, I'll go ahead and put sits inside of the brackets and run it, and as you can see, we can get a W, even though this would be the character number 7. And this is it because as I explained earlier, it starts with 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, and finally the W would be number 6. So this is really useful when you are trying to access information inside of a string or a list maybe. Now that you know how to access a certain piece of information, let's go ahead and see how you access the last piece of the information. So you go ahead and type -1, and as you can see here, it prints out the dot at the end. However, if you can't do this for some reason, you can go ahead and type in the length of the example string, which if you run it, you'll see that it is 83 characters long. Now, remember when I told you it starts with a 0? So if we want to access the same period, you'd have to go example string, open brackets, and then go 82 since it starts with 0. And as you can see here, we get the same period. Now, if you want to access a certain piece of information that isn't one character only, you can go ahead and put sits, then a colon, and then the ending index. However, the ending index isn't included. So as you can see here, we get world, exclamation point, comma, and then a space. If we go ahead and go 13, then we would get it without a space. And finally 12, we would get it without a comma, even though 12 is the comma itself. Now you can also access various pieces of information with the negative number system I showed you before. So you can go -1 colon -7. However, this won't work because this is actually in reverse. You're trying to go from the period to the S. Now let's go ahead and put -7 to 1. As you can see here, we got strings without the period at the end. And if you go ahead and put 0 instead of the -1, then you'll see that you get actually until the period, which is really useful. Now, if you want to access a specific index but you don't know exactly where it is, you can go ahead and use the index method. You can type in index and then inside whatever you want. As you can see, this starts with the index 14. It won't give you the whole index, but it will give you the start. So now let's go over a few of the other methods that you can use in strings. If you go period, you can see all of them. However, I won't be teaching all of them to you since they are a lot. I'll just be teaching the ones that are most useful. Now, since Python is case sensitive, then .upper is really useful when you want to put everything inside of caps, and .lower is really useful when you want to get rid of every single caps lock. Now, these are the most useful ones generally when you are coding. However, you can go ahead and check all of those if you want. Now, I'm going to give you a challenge. What I want you to do is create an example string like this one, and go ahead and access the information example. Now, you can easily do this by counting it. However, I don't want you to count anything. I want you to use the methods we saw earlier, like dot index and the length of a string, so that you can access this information without counting. I'll give you 5 seconds, pause the video. Now, as you can see here, this is my solution. First of all, I created a variable called example index, where I use .index to see where the index of example starts. Then I went ahead and printed example string with the brackets to access the information from example index all the way to example index plus the length of the word. If you were able to do that, then great. That was a really hard challenge. If you weren't able to do it, then don't worry. Now let's go ahead and talk about the types of information. Now let's go ahead and put username as usual and ask the user for his name with an input. Now I'm going to put a colon there because it looks kind of nice in my opinion. You don't have to do this. Then let's ask the user for his age, again with an input. That says, what is your age? Now I'm going to go ahead and print this by using username plus the space and then finally the user age. However, you can also use a formatted string, especially if you want to practice. Now let's go ahead and run this. It asks us for our name. Let's just go ahead and fill it. And as you can see here, the 18 looks like a number. However, it isn't actually a number. If we go ahead and print the type of it, I'm going to go ahead and do it in another line. Otherwise, it will give me an error. So I'm going to write type and then user age. Now let's fill in the data again. And as you can see here, it is telling us that it is of the class string. Now, this is fine for many situations when we are displaying data. However, if we want to use the data for something, for example, let's get the year of birth by doing the current year minus the user age. Now I know this won't be exact. However, this is just an example. Now if we try to do this, you'll see very quickly that it is kind of yellow right there because it will chuck an error. Now let's go ahead and run this. Let's print out the year of birth. So let's delete that and type in year of birth. And when we run it, you'll see, well, first of all, let's input the data. And as you can see here, it will give us an error. This is because we have 2021, which is an integer, and user age, which as we saw earlier is a string. Now if we wanted to fix this, we can go ahead and type integer to convert the string to an integer. Now if we go ahead and run it, you'll see that it runs without a problem. It is telling me that my birth year is 2003. Now you can actually convert from various types. We can convert from number to string with the string method. We can convert from string to number with the integer. Now, an integer is a whole number. If we actually wanted to convert a string to a float, which is with decimals, you can use the float. Now, what do I mean by integer is a whole number? Well, if you try to input something like, let's say, Jacob right here at 18.3, you'll see that it gives us an error because you can't convert 18.3 to an integer. Now if you go ahead and type float, you'll see that it will run it without a problem. Let's go ahead and type 18.3 again, and you'll see that it outputs the year without much of a problem. Now, you can also convert from string to a list with the list method, and you can convert from list to string with the string method. Now, these are all of the basic conversions you can use with the information that we have seen. So let's get into lists now. Lists are basically various pieces of information put together, which you can also use strings to put various pieces of information together. However, accessing it is a little bit more difficult when it is inside of string. And as we have previously seen, we can't put different type of data inside of string. If you try to use the user age plus a username like this, you would get an error, as we have seen before. Now I'll just actually write it so you can see username plus the user age, and let's try to run this. Now, as you can see, you can't concatenate string to an integer. Now, if we put quotation marks around this, then we can use it just fine. However, there are various cases where you won't want to do this. So let's go ahead and show you what lists are. So lists are basically various pieces of information, as I mentioned before, and you can access it and add to the list very easily. So a list works by putting an opening bracket and a closing bracket, and anything inside of it will be separated by a comma. So as you can see here, I did username, comma, user age, and when I print this, it'll give us Jacob and 18 without a problem. Accessing information out of lists is very similar to accessing information inside of strings. So let's go ahead and put the opening bracket and the closing bracket again. Like I told you, to access information inside of strings and lists, you always have to do this. Now, if you see, the index works the same. If you put 0, it'll give you the first list item. If you put a 1, it'll give you the second one. And if you put a 2, it'll give you the third item. So let's just go ahead and add a number at the end so you can see this. So let's put a 2 inside of the index system, and you'll see that it'll print out the third item. You can also use the -1 system to access information, and you can also use the colon to access various pieces of information. Accessing information inside of strings and lists is basically the same. So you can also actually use the .index similar to the string, and I'll put username inside of it, which actually doesn't have to be a variable. You can type in whatever you want it to access, and as you'll see here, it gives us the index 0. To make the example, I will actually just go ahead and type Jacob with a space at the end, and you'll see that it also gives us 0. Now, if you want to go ahead and add information to a list, you have to use the append method. So let's go ahead and append hello world with an exclamation sign. Delete the space so that we are consistent, and I'm going to print it above and below so you can see the difference. Now let's go ahead and run it. So if you see here, the first one, the one that is above the append, won't print hello world. However, the one that is below will print hello world. Now the append will always put the information at the end. However, if you wanted to go ahead and put the information somewhere else, you'd have to use a different method, which is called insert. So let's go ahead and delete this, and then type in insert. And the first argument it will take is where do you want it. So once again, the system for index is it starts with 0 and then 1. So let's say I want it after the username, then I'd have to put 1 and then whatever comma and then whatever I want it to add. So as you can see here, it added it in the middle of the list. If you want to remove information from a list, you can go ahead and type the list name, in this case user information, and then pop it. Now this will automatically remove the last item, and you can go ahead and store the last item inside of a variable. I'll call it random number since it will remove 17. Now let's go ahead and print the random number and then user information. Now let's go ahead and run this. As you can see, it prints out 17 as the random number, and in the list you can no longer see 17. Now pop is really useful. However, sometimes you want to remove a specific thing, not the end of the list. So for this, you can actually go ahead and write the name of the list and then remove, and it will ask you what you want to remove. Now in this case, I'll type in Jacob, and when you run this, you'll be able to see that it actually removes Jacob from the list. Now you can't actually store this inside of a variable. Finally, there are many of these methods which you can use. There are many methods which you can explore. You can do this by putting a dot after a list, and it will give you all of the options. I suggest you do this and see what every one of them does. However, you don't need to because I already gave you the most used ones. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, then subscribe for more.